Amira Bell stood alone in court. No lawyer, no family. Just a 17-year-old black girl clutching memories of a home the city had stolen. She wasn't begging. She wasn't lying. She simply wanted to sit where her father died. But Judge Marilyn Keaton saw only a nuisance, and when Amira cried, the judge laughed. Laughed. Right there in front of everyone. What if the girl they dismissed wasn't alone after all, and the next person who walked through that door would change everything? Share your thoughts below because this story speaks louder than words. Let's begin. The heavy courtroom door groaned as it swung open. All eyes turned. There she was. A slender black girl, Amira Bell, barely 17, escorted in with silver cuffs, digging into her wrists. Her hoodie hung loose on her frame. No mother, no lawyer, no one behind her. The room didn't murmur. It didn't need to. The silence already knew what to think. The bailiff dropped her cuffs on the table with a careless clink and walked away like she wasn't worth a second glance. Amira didn't flinch. She just stood there. From behind the high bench, Judge Marilyn Keaton slid her glasses down the bridge of her nose and gave the girl a once-over. Her mouth twitched, not in kindness, not even in interest, but something colder. "Let me guess," she said dryly. "No attorney?" "No, Your Honor." Amira replied, her voice clear but soft. "You were offered one." "I declined." "Of course you did," the judge muttered with a sigh. "Another little crusader." Then louder with a trace of sarcasm. "So, you'll be representing yourself?" "Yes, ma'am." That did it. A wave of stifled laughter rippled through the courtroom. "God help her," someone whispered behind the prosecutor's table. "She must have watched too many courtroom shows," another muttered. The judge tapped her gavel once more out of habit than authority. "This isn't a debate club, Ms. Bell," she said, voice laced with contempt. "This is a court of law." From the front row of seats, Officer Owen Carter straightened. He wasn't laughing. He couldn't. His eyes had landed on the intake form. Name Amira Bell. Next of kin. Victor Bell, deceased. His breath caught. That name. That man. Victor Bell, the architect who designed half the city buildings before he died during a zoning protest last year. But he stayed quiet, for now. Across the courtroom in the back row, Lena Brooks, a rookie reporter fresh out of school, angled her phone just enough to stay discreet. She was live streaming silently, lips pressed tight. She'd seen the docket and something had told her this girl's story won't end in a whisper. The prosecutor stepped forward. "Your Honor, the defendant stands charged with repeated unlawful entry into condemned property owned by the city. She was found trespassing again on 432 Willow Avenue. Third offense in 6 months." Amira's shoulders tightened. "That house has been declared unsafe for human occupancy." The prosecutor continued. "It has visible structural damage, collapsed flooring, and—" "That house," Amira interrupted, voice rising ever so slightly, "is my home." The room stilled. "It was your home," the judge corrected coldly. "Now it's property of the city, and you were warned." "I didn't break in," Amira said, not shouting but steady. "I sat on the front steps. That's where my father died." "That porch!" Her voice cracked was his final breath. A long pause followed, one that no one seemed prepared for. Judge Keaton shifted in her seat. "Ms. Bell, I'm not here to listen to stories. I'm here to enforce law." "You're not listening at all," Amira said quietly. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me," I said. Amira lifted her gaze. "You've already made up your mind. The cuffs were just for show." A gasp rose in the gallery. Even Owen turned fully, now eyes locked on the girl. "You think I'm another case file, another poor kid who thinks the world owes her something," Amira said. "But you don't know what my father gave to this city. You don't know what was stolen when they bulldozed our future and called it code enforcement." Judge Keaton's face turned hard. "You are this close to contempt of court." "No," Amira said. "I'm this close to being heard." Lena's hand shook slightly as she steadied her phone. Her live stream count ticked upward. The judge slammed the gavel. "Enough." Amira didn't flinch. She stood still, just like her father had taught her. "Stand still," he'd told her once, holding her tiny hands on their porch, even when the world tries to move you. Especially then. She never forgot. Amira stood with her wrists still sore from the cuffs, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's not trespassing," she said quietly. It's home. A few people in the courtroom shifted in their seats, clearly unimpressed. Judge Keaton leaned forward, her gaze sharp and cold. This court deals in facts, Ms. Bell, not poetry. Amira didn't flinch. She looked down at her hands, trembling, not from fear, but from restraint. Then for a moment her eyes softened, her mind slipping elsewhere. She was 6 again, crouched in the Georgia heat, holding a towel soaked in cool water, dabbing her father's forehead. Victor Bell was mixing concrete sweat running down his back as he laughed. "One brick at a time, baby girl. This house is gonna stand long after I'm gone." He had built it from scratch, every nail, every beam. It wasn't just a roof, it was the only place her family ever felt safe. "I used to fall asleep on the porch," Amira said aloud, almost to herself. "I could hear my mama's singing from the kitchen window." A hush fell over the room. She looked up. "My mom passed away right there, on the living room couch. And 3 years later, my father, he died of cancer, just months after the city took our house. He never got to step back inside it again." Lena Brooks, seated in the back, paused her live stream for a split second and started typing furiously. "The land remembers." That's what Amira had just said. 4 words, but they carried the weight of generations. Judge Keaton didn't blink. "And yet here we are, with you violating a sealed order not once, but 3 times. "It wasn't sealed when I opened that door," Amira replied. "I walked into my father's hallway, not some crime scene." A light chuckle came from the prosecutor's side, but one person wasn't laughing. Officer Owen Carter leaned forward in his chair, rereading the name on the intake sheet, Victor Bell. He quietly pulled out his phone beneath the bench and typed the name into Google. The top result made his eyebrows lift. Victor Bell, architect of record, Mercy Ridge Hospital. Wait, he had designed that hospital. He clicked through photos, community projects, veterans housing, a library renovation. One headline read, "Local architect donates time to build transitional homes for homeless veterans." Owen blinked. This wasn't just some name on a report. This man built half the county's community spaces, and no one in the courtroom seemed to know it. Amira stood there alone with more dignity than he'd seen from any adult all week. She didn't demand pity. She wasn't theatrical. She just wanted to sit where her parents once laughed, sang, and died. Lena hit publish on her post. Caption, "The land remembers." Within minutes, notifications pinged. Dozens, then hundreds of views rolled in. Comments started appearing. "Is this real? Why's no one talking about this girl? Wait, Victor Bell's daughter?" But in the courtroom, none of that mattered. Not yet. Judge Keaton, still unimpressed, leaned back in her chair. "You're here to defend yourself, Ms. Bell, not rewrite history." Amira took a slow breath, remembering the words her father once told her right before his last chemo treatment. "Stand still even when the world tries to move you." She nodded once. "I'm not here to rewrite anything. I'm here to remember what matters." There was silence again, just for a moment. Then the judge snapped, "You want to defend yourself in this court. Then prove it." A beat. Amira didn't move. "I will." Judge Marilyn Keaton's voice sliced through the room like a cold gust. "You're not here because of grief, Ms. Bell. You're here because of choice." The courtroom fell into silence. No one gasped. No one objected. Because to them it sounded reasonable, just another scolding from a judge to a young girl in trouble. But to anyone who had truly been listening, it was something else entirely. It was a dismissal. Not just of Amira's words, but of her existence. Amira's eyes didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. But something in the way she tilted her chin said everything she knew. This wasn't about justice. It never was. The prosecutor, a heavy-set man in a navy suit, stood and spoke without even looking at her. "Your Honor, given Ms. Bell's repeated violations, 2 previous warnings, both documented, I believe there's no reason to drag this out. The evidence is clear. I recommend sentencing today." No mention of context. No mention of the funeral wreaths Amira had left at the doorstep. No mention of the house being hers once. Just warnings, violations, efficiency. Amira didn't argue. She didn't plead. She just stared up at the ceiling, eyes fixed as if looking past the fluorescent lights beyond the walls, far from the people who had already made up their minds. Some thought she was trying not to cry. But Owen Carter, the young officer, watched closer. "No, That wasn't fear. That was something else. She was separating herself. From them. From this. It was something he'd seen once before when his cousin stood at their father's military funeral and didn't shed a tear until days later alone. Judge Keaton straightened her posture. This court sentences Amira Bell to 30 days in juvenile detention. Effective immediately. A quiet thud landed in everyone's chest, but not in Amira's. She didn't flinch, didn't speak, didn't even lower her eyes from the ceiling. In the back of the room, Lena Brooks captured the moment on her phone. The click of her touchscreen was barely audible, but what she typed next wasn't, "When dignity is punished." She hit post. A few feet over, a teenage girl in the audience part of a school civics class on a field trip felt her eyes begin to burn. She had laughed earlier when the judge called Amira just another lost girl, but now something had shifted. She turned away, wiping tears, quietly embarrassed by how wrong she'd been, and Amira, still motionless, slowly lowered her gaze from the ceiling and turned to Judge Keaton. Her voice came soft, not bitter but clear. "May I make one phone call?" It wasn't a plea. It was a request made with the calm of someone who already knew what would happen next. The judge raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by the poise. "You'll be granted one call at intake per protocol." Amira nodded once, offering no thanks. No reaction. Because in her silence something louder was building. Lena watched through the lens of her phone. She didn't live stream this time. She just recorded. Somehow she knew this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the match being struck. And outside, the caption she'd posted minutes earlier was already gaining traction. "When dignity is punished." Hundreds of shares. Thousands of comments. But inside that courtroom, everything remained frozen, stuck in the rhythm of procedure, judgment, and silence. In the holding room, Amira sat at the edge of a plastic chair, one hand still cuffed to the table. The phone was cold against her cheek. She didn't hesitate, didn't waste a second. Her voice was low, steady. "It's happening now." There was silence on the other end, then a calm, precise response. "Understood." She hung up. No name exchanged, no goodbyes, just a code, a signal. Because whatever that call was, it wasn't a cry for help, it was a green light. Minutes later, back in the courtroom, the air hadn't changed. But Amira had. Judge Keaton tapped her gavel once and looked up with a smirk. "Calling for pity doesn't delay sentencing, Miss Bell. You'll still be processed today." Amira didn't respond. She didn't need to. Lena Brooks had seen it all. The call, the stillness afterward, the way Amira re-entered the courtroom not as a girl defeated, but as someone waiting for the next domino to fall. Lena's fingers flew over her phone screen. She posted the moment this time with a bold caption. She didn't beg. She activated. Within seconds, her post was shared. Within minutes, it was on fire. 10,000 views, then 15,000. Comment after comment rolled in. Who is this girl? What did she mean by, "It's happening now"? This feels bigger than we think. Owen Carter. The young officer, still seated near the prosecution table, couldn't shake a feeling building in his chest. So while the judge reviewed the paperwork, he quietly opened his tablet again. Something about that call. Something about her. He went deeper into Amira's file. Looked again at the property record, the house she'd been trespassing on. That's when his brow furrowed. The timestamps were off. The notice of seizure had been filed after the eviction date. By law, that wasn't valid. And more. The deed transfer was suspiciously fast, barely 48 hours after her father's funeral. That wasn't just bureaucratic efficiency. That was a setup. Owen leaned back slowly, realization dawning on him. He looked at Amira again, not as a rebellious teen, but as someone who'd known exactly where this would lead. Outside the courthouse, the buzz had started to grow. Lena's live stream wasn't just trending, it was pulling people in. A small group of students from the nearby university had seen it. They weren't activists, just kids on their lunch break, but they recognized injustice when they saw it. Within half an hour, the steps outside the courthouse began to fill. Quietly at first, holding up their phones, watching the live feed from inside. They weren't shouting, not yet, but they were there. Back inside, Judge Keaton still hadn't looked up. The system was running its course like always. Only this time, the course was about to shift. Amira sat in silence, hands now free of the cuffs. Posture relaxed, eyes still forward. Not defiant, not afraid, just ready. And that readiness was contagious. Because the courtroom, though still operating under routine, had begun to feel like something was off. The energy had shifted. The tension wasn't from Amira anymore. It was from what was coming. The courtroom air was heavy thick with silence after Amira's sentencing. People had returned to their seats, thinking the drama was over. Judge Keaton had just slammed her gavel down, lips twisted with self-satisfaction. Then, click, clack, click. A rhythmic sound echoed down the courthouse hallway. Not rushed, not hesitant. It was the sound of high heels on marble, confident, commanding, deliberate. Inside the courtroom, Lena looked up from her phone and whispered to herself, "That's not just anyone." The double doors creaked, then burst open. A tall black woman stepped into the room. Her charcoal blazer perfectly fitted her city-issued badge hanging visibly around her neck. Her presence alone sliced through the courtroom's dull routine. Every head turned. Judge Keaton squinted at her tone cold. "This is a closed proceeding. You're interrupting." The woman's gaze never wavered. "So was your ruling," she replied, her voice low and sharp as a blade. "Irregular and unlawful." Lena was already filming, whispering to her live audience. "The sister is here, and she's not just family, she's a storm." Amira, still seated, turned slowly. Her face, which had been stone cold all morning, softened. It was the first time she smiled all day. And it wasn't just relief, it was recognition. The plan was in motion. Judge Keaton leaned forward. "Identify yourself. This is not how court operates." The woman stepped closer, calm yet with the authority of someone who's had to speak over rooms like this her entire career. Janelle Bell, Director of Urban Planning City of Larkhaven, licensed civil engineer, certified zoning arbitrator, and older sister of the defendant you just sentenced without due process. She laid a folder down on the table, with precision opened it and slid it forward. Inside documents, property maps, zoning approvals, and a letter of intent filed before the property was ever sealed. Janelle's voice didn't rise, but it struck like thunder. "You violated protocol." The seizure was rushed. The notice never reached our residence, and the appeal ignored. Keaton's lips thinned. "You can't just barge in. You already made that mistake, Your Honor. You barged into our lives without facts, without fairness." Amira looked up at her sister. The same woman who used to help her braid her hair before school, now standing in front of a judge like a mountain that would not move. Owen Carter blinked rapidly, still holding Amira's file. His fingers hovered over his phone. Something in him whispered, "Backtrack." "Now." Janelle turned slightly. "Officer Carter, I believe you've reviewed the case file. Did you see the architect's signature on the original plans for that property?" He cleared his throat. "Yes, Victor Bell, her father, and the permit code." He nodded slowly. "Civic trust status. It's a registered legacy property." A murmur rippled across the room. Judge Keaton slammed the gavel again, rattling the moment. "This is not how law works." Janelle tilted her head. "No, it isn't. But it's how injustice reveals itself, loud, entitled, and unprepared for consequences." She reached into her coat pocket and placed a second item on the table, a flash drive. "This contains the zoning committee meeting minutes from 3 months ago. It will show the property wasn't legally eligible for repossession. You'll want that entered into the record." Lena's live stream now showed the count ticking past 20,000 viewers. Comments exploded. This just flipped. "Who is this woman? Yo Keaton about to eat her wig." Outside, students gathered on the courthouse steps. Some held up their phones, showing the live stream to others just arriving. Inside, Janelle turned back to her sister. "You okay, kid?" Amira nodded slowly. I waited. That word waited hung in the air like prophecy. Janelle smiled, eyes fierce but wet. "You did good. Now let's finish this." Amira rose slowly. The chains on her wrists clinked as she stood. Judge Keaton opened her mouth, but Owen Carter moved first. "Your Honor," he said quietly, "I think we need to pause the ruling." "On what grounds?" Keaton barked. He hesitated, then said it anyway. "On the grounds that we might have just jailed the wrong person for the wrong reason in front of the wrong audience." You could hear the breath leave the room. Janelle Bell didn't yell. She didn't argue. She simply reached into her leather briefcase, placed it gently on the table, and unzipped it with calm finality. Then, without a word, she laid down a thick manila folder. The sound of it hitting the table, soft but unmistakable, was louder than any gavel. It was the kind of sound that said, "We came prepared. You didn't." She slid it across to the court clerk. "For the record," she said, "these are the original documents. Judge Keaton leaned forward slightly, her composure cracking just a hair. Her voice was tight. "And what exactly are we reviewing here?" Janelle didn't look at her. She looked at her sister. Then, turning back to the room, she answered loud enough for every person, camera, and microphone to hear deed of ownership, full property tax records for the last 12 years. And she paused. The posthumous state commendation awarded to Victor Bell, my father, the man who built that house brick by hand while designing the very hospital your city relies on. She placed a final laminated document on top. A photo of Victor Bell smiling, receiving a medal from the governor. Lena's camera zoomed in instinctively, her fingers trembling over the live stream button. She whispered, This is about to go viral." The courtroom didn't move. You could feel the temperature drop. Judge Keaton blinked, then slowly reached for the file with rigid fingers. She flipped through it. Ownership signatures, architectural plans, stamped with the city's own approval seal, payment history, legal notices. All dated, all clean. Then she saw it, the foreclosure order. Her own signature, stamped 6 months ago. Signed based on an automated zoning review. No personal verification. No independent review. No due process. The color drained from her face. Owen Carter stood slowly, voice steady but stunned. "Your Honor, these documents directly contradict the basis for the seizure. This changes everything." He turned toward the gallery, not to the judge. "We need to vacate the sentence, immediately." A ripple of sound passed through the room. Lena captured the exact moment the judge's expression changed. Eyebrows, collapsing lips, parting slightly. Eyes searching the papers like they were suddenly written in a language she didn't speak. She snapped a still frame from the video, uploaded it with the caption, "Judge realizes she just sentenced a hero's daughter." Within seconds, the views climbed into the tens of thousands. In an hour, it would be over 100,000. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Some brought signs. Others stood silently watching Lena's stream, their faces a mix of shock and vindication. Inside, Judge Keaton finally spoke, but it wasn't the voice of control anymore. It was shaky, small. I wasn't made aware of the full history of this property." Janelle didn't flinch. "You weren't interested in it." No one said a word. Amira stood now, her hands still cuffed, but her posture taller than anyone else in the room. She looked at the judge direct, unwavering. "You called me just another lost girl, but you never asked what I was trying to hold on to." Keaton opened her mouth again, then stopped. Her hands, usually poised and precise, trembled as she removed her glasses. She sat back as if the bench itself had become too heavy to bear. There was nothing left to say. The bailiff shifted uncomfortably, as if waiting for instruction that wouldn't come. The clerk kept typing, but more slowly now, glancing toward Owen for direction. It was Owen who broke the silence. "Motion to vacate sentencing," he said clearly. "Pending review of illegal seizure documentation." Judge Keaton nodded faintly. No gavel this time. No declaration. Just silence. Lena's voice was barely above a whisper as she narrated the moment for her stream. And just like that, the weight of truth crushed the room. Amira's cuffs were removed. No applause, no cheers, just reverence. Janelle stepped forward, placed a hand lightly on her sister's back, and guided her gently away from the defense table. And as the two sisters walked out together past the judge who had once dismissed them, you could almost hear the building breathe again. The courtroom just seconds ago, a temple of silence, now buzzed with the hum of disbelief. Judge Keaton gripped the edges of her bench like they could anchor her, but nothing could. Her lips parted dry and hesitant. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. I didn't know," she stammered, voice hoarse. From the gallery, Janelle Bell didn't move, but her voice carried like a blade gliding across glass. "No, Judge. You didn't want to know." A hush followed, heavy, like the walls themselves had just been indicted. The prosecutor cleared his throat, eyes darting between Keaton and the growing crowd of phones pointed in his direction. "Your Honor, the state formally withdraws all charges against Miss Amira Bell effective immediately." He didn't look proud. He looked scared. Amira blinked, not in surprise, but restraint. She remained perfectly still, as if she'd trained her soul for this moment. Owen Carter, still at the side bench, stood slowly. His voice was calm, but loaded with quiet authority. "I've cross-checked the entire acquisition file. Judge Keaton approved the seizure without a single manual review. He turned toward the room. That means this wasn't an isolated mistake. This was policy. A gasp escaped someone in the back. Lena caught it on her live stream. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The words scrolled across the screen. Judge signed away a home built by a state-honored architect. No one checked. How many others? This ain't a courtroom, it's a pipeline. Outside, the protest had doubled, tripled. Now it wasn't just students, veterans, architects, retired teachers. They were holding up signs that read, "Heritage isn't trespassing." She spoke for us all. Remember Victor Bell? Keaton heard it. Through the thick walls, through the courtroom doors. She shook her head. I've served this bench for 22 years. I've sentenced murderers, rapists. I didn't think. Her voice cracked. Janelle stepped forward, gaze unwavering. Exactly. You didn't think. You just stamped and buried families with the paperwork. The words hit Keaton like a stone to the ribs. She sat back down, but this time not to rule. She sank. Lena slowly zoomed in with her camera. Not for drama, but truth. And there it was, a judge cloaked in black crumbling under the color of shame. Across the room, Owen was speaking again, but not to Keaton, to the people. This court will initiate a full review of all eminent domain actions approved under this administration. Names will be checked, families will be contacted, mistakes corrected. Another voice, trembling but bold, called out from the back. How long has this been going on? Owen turned. Too long, he answered. And it ends today. Lena typed it instantly. It ends today. Keaton stared down at her bench, now just polished wood. It gave her no comfort, no cover. Outside, a new chant had begun. Say her name. Amira Bell. Say his name. Victor Bell. She placed her hand over her mouth, not to think, but to hide. But it was too late for hiding. Janelle stood beside her sister, arm wrapped gently around her shoulder. Amira whispered just loud enough for Keaton to hear, You didn't just take our home. You erased our name from the land we built. And that's when the judge, for the first time, looked like she might cry. But no one rushed to comfort her. Not because they didn't believe in mercy, but because mercy only lives where truth has been told. And until that moment, Judge Marilyn Keaton had lived only in paperwork. The room fell into a silence that didn't feel empty. It felt full, heavy with meaning. Judge Keaton cleared her throat, but her voice was barely above a whisper. All charges are vacated. Miss Bell, you are free to go. No applause, no cheers, just a stillness that said, finally. A click echoed as the bailiff stepped forward and unclasped the handcuffs from Amira's wrists. The sound, small as it was, felt louder than the gavel. A chain of injustice quietly broken. Lena captured the moment. Her live stream viewer count ticked past 300,000 and rising by the second. No need for a caption this time. The image said it all, a black girl head held high, freed not by pity, but by truth. Amira didn't flinch, didn't cry. She stood calmly like someone whose spirit had never been caged to begin with. From the gallery, Janelle stepped forward. No grand gestures, no speeches. Just reached for her sister's hand and squeezed it. It wasn't a reunion. It was a homecoming of name, of voice, of presence. The two of them stood there, one in power, one in pain now, side by side. Owen Carter, still in uniform, took a hesitant step forward. His eyes met Amira's. There was guilt in his throat, and it hurt to speak. Miss Bell, I'm sorry. We failed you. Amira looked at him. No bitterness, no softness either, just truth. She gave a small nod, not as forgiveness, but as acknowledgement. She didn't say, it's okay, because it wasn't. She didn't say, I forgive you, because that wasn't his to ask for. But she let him carry the weight. That was enough. Across the courtroom, Judge Keaton still hadn't looked up. She removed her glasses slowly, set them down beside her. The ritual of a judge. But now it felt more like retreat than procedure. She stared at the wooden surface in front of her, not because she was reading anything, but because shame doesn't need a script. Not once did she glance toward Amira. Because if she did, she might see everything she'd tried to deny strength. Grace. History. From the far row, a student in a navy hoodie pulled out his notebook. He scribbled quietly, eyes wide, hands trembling slightly. His pencil traced a single sentence across the top of the page. She won by standing still. Somewhere far from the glares of power and politics, a truth had been planted in a young heart. Outside, the chants hadn't faded. They'd evolved. Now they weren't shouting against something, they were standing for someone. Say her name, Amira Bell. Justice has a daughter. Inside, Amira finally exhaled, not loudly but like a door unlocking. She looked around the courtroom. The place that once wanted to erase her name had just spoken it publicly, permanently, and without conditions. But in her eyes you could see it. This wasn't about winning. This wasn't a trophy moment. Because for her, justice wasn't about a verdict, it was about what comes after. She turned to Janelle and whispered, "Let's go." Not away from the courthouse, but toward what came next. As they walked past the gallery, people didn't stand in applause. They stood in respect. Not for what she'd done, but for what she represented. A name that refused to be buried. A girl who never shouted but was finally heard. And as the courtroom doors opened, letting in the sunlight from outside, for the first time that day, Amira Bell smiled. The courtroom was nearly empty now. The energy that had once swelled to the ceiling had slowly drifted out, leaving behind a quiet that felt sacred. Judge Keaton still sat at the bench. Her robe, which once seemed like armor, now just looked heavy. She glanced down at her hands, then looked up, not as a judge, but as a woman humbled. Her voice was hushed, like she wasn't sure she deserved to speak. "Is there anything I can do to fix this?" The question hung in the air like a cracked promise. Amira stood still, eyes steady, posture soft but firm. She didn't look angry. She looked certain. And when she finally answered, it wasn't a demand. It was a call. "Yes," she said simply. "Start seeing. Not me, not this case, just start seeing." The words didn't echo. They didn't need to. They landed like a bell in a cathedral, deep, unmistakable, and impossible to ignore. The room froze. No one moved. Not out of fear, but out of respect. It was the kind of silence you don't break. You listen to it. Lena had been filming, but even she had lowered her phone for a moment, eyes brimming. Then she picked it back up and quietly snapped a single photo. Amira, still standing, backlit by the courtroom skylight, eyes calm. A girl who had been handcuffed just hours ago, now glowing with something stronger than victory. That photo would make its way across the internet in seconds. By morning, it would grace the cover of the New York Times. The caption read, "She didn't raise her voice. The world heard her anyway." But even before that, things had already begun shifting. Owen Carter, back at his desk that evening, typed up a draft. Subject line: land seizure reform. Immediate action required. He didn't wait for approval. He hit send. A few minutes later, his phone buzzed. It was a reply from the state attorney's office. "One line, we're in. Let's clean house." By nightfall, the first steps of a statewide audit had been announced. It started with one case. It was never going to end there. Lena's video clip, the one with Amira's silent stare, had passed 2 million views. Someone added subtitles to it. She never yelled. She made them listen anyway. It became a rallying cry. Students quoted it. Professors debated it. Activists wore it on shirts. Amira didn't post anything. She didn't go live. Didn't tweet. Didn't even speak to the crowd outside the courthouse who waited with signs and tears and fists in the air. She walked quietly through them, not around them. And somehow that was louder than any speech could have been. Later that week, outside the courthouse, a reporter from CNN leaned forward during a press huddle. Camera flashing, microphones raised. She asked the one question everyone had been waiting for. "Amira, what do you want to happen next?" The crowd hushed. Even the wind seemed to pause. Amira didn't answer. She looked straight into the camera. Didn't blink. Didn't look away. Just looked. Not cold, not blank, just full of memory of fight of presence. She didn't say a word. And yet somehow everyone felt like she had spoken directly to them. Behind her, Janelle placed a gentle hand on her back. Not to guide her, just to remind her, "I'm here. I see you." That moment, the silence, the gaze, the stillness was picked up by every major news outlet. CNN aired it under the headline, "Sometimes justice doesn't need a mic." The system had tried to bury her with procedure, with paperwork, with presumption. She answered it with stillness, and somehow it shook louder than 1,000 protests. Inside that courtroom, power had trembled, but out here something steadier had taken root. Not just a name restored, a name remembered, and a truth that would ripple far beyond the wooden walls of that courthouse. Amira Bell had not been loud. She had been undeniable. It was quiet on the street now. No reporters, no microphones. Just the sound of wind brushing through leaves and a screen door creaking gently in the distance. Amira stepped out of the car and paused at the sidewalk. The house stood just ahead hers again officially, but in truth it had never stopped being hers. Not to her, not to the earth beneath it. The mailbox still leaned a little left like it always had. The porch light flickered faintly, same as when she was 8 and afraid of the dark. And the front steps, those were exactly as she remembered. She climbed them slowly, one hand grazing the old wooden rail. Then she sat, right on the top step. Same spot where her father used to sit beside her after dinner, telling stories that somehow always circled back to the same 2 words, justice and dignity. Amira looked out over the yard. The garden hadn't been tended in a while, but even so, the tulip bulbs had pushed through, resilient, unafraid. Behind her, the screen door opened. It was Janelle holding something wooden and worn. She stepped down beside her sister and quietly knelt near the porch frame. Without a word, she hung the sign they'd made the night before. Victor Bell House, built not bought. The letters were hand-carved, weatherproofed, permanent. A tribute, a marker, a declaration. Lena arrived a few minutes later, camera slung over her shoulder, still dressed like a journalist, but walking like a friend. She didn't rush into questions. She waited. Then gently, "You won, Amira. What does it feel like?" Amira didn't answer right away. She looked out across the yard again, to the place where her father once planted oak seedlings with her, explaining that legacy isn't what you build, it's what stays standing after you're gone. Finally, she spoke. "I don't need a deed," she said. "The land remembers." No bravado, no speeches, just truth. The kind that sinks deep. The kind people carry long after the credits roll. Lena's camera captured the moment, not with zooms or edits, but just as it was 2 sisters, a front porch, and a quiet that said everything. Above them, the sky had cleared into a soft, endless blue. Wind stirred the edges of the grass. In the distance, a child laughed, playing with chalk on the sidewalk. The camera pulled back slowly. Past the yard, past the gate, past the neighborhood, until the house sat small but proud in the frame. A home returned, not just in title but in truth. And then black screen. Words appeared one line at a time. Some stories rewrite the rules. Others remind us why they existed. Then nothing. No music, no credits, just a breath. A still moment, the kind that holds more weight than noise ever could. And somewhere out there in 100 different towns, people sat still in their living rooms. Hands on their hearts, tears in their eyes, feeling something they couldn't quite name but somehow knew had always mattered, because justice had found its way home, and the land had never forgotten. If this story moved you even just a little, take a moment to pause and remember what it stood for. Because the land remembers wasn't just about a house, it was about dignity, about silence that spoke louder than screams, and about the power of truth even when no one is ready to hear it. At Mr. Mac's Stories, we believe that stories like this don't just entertain, they awaken. They remind us that justice isn't a courtroom decision. It's the echo of every voice that refused to be erased. So if this story stirred something in you, like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe to Mr. Mac's Stories so you never miss the next powerful truth. Every click, every comment, every share, it fuels our mission to bring real, meaningful stories to life. Your support gives us the strength to keep going, to keep digging deep and telling the stories that matter. Because at Mr. Mac's Stories, we don't just tell stories, we remember with you. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay brave, stay kind, and never stop asking what justice really means.